The baffling UFO incident of 1897 in Aurora, Texas. The pilot was clearly not an inhabitant of this world. He had a small extraterrestrial body, and he was mangled in the wreckage. There was also strange hieroglyphic figures seen on the wreckage, which represented a mixture of aluminum and silver. But there was a lot of sightings of swarms of cigar-shaped extraterrestrial UFOs. They were called mystery airships at that time. They're classified, of course, as unidentified flying objects, and they were in a series of newspapers originating in western United States, spreading during 1896 and early 1897. And this one here in Aurora, Texas, was in April 16, 1897, published by the Table Rock Argus. It claimed that a group of anonymous but reliable witnesses saw an airship sailing overhead. Also, the Aurora, Texas, this was April 19th, a few days later. Dallas Morning News, April 19th, that was 3 days after the Texas airship mystery. 1897 reported a couple of days before an airship had smashed into a windmill belonging to Judge Proctor, and then it crashed after smashing into the windmill. The occupant was dead and mangled, but the story reported that the presumed pilot was clearly not an inhabitant of Earth. There were strange hieroglyphic figures seen on the wreckage, and the metal of this was a mixture of aluminum and silver. It must have weighed several tons. In the 20th century, a few years later, by the way, the Wright brothers tried to create their first airplane. Now, strange hieroglyph figures we saw in the 20th century, unusual metallic material recovered from a presumed crash site was shown to contain a percentage of aluminum and iron admixed. The story ended by noting that the pilot was given a Christian burial, even though he was an extraterrestrial, in the town cemetery. In 1973, MUFON investigators discovered the alleged stone marker used in this burial. Their metal detectors indicated a quantity of foreign material might remain buried there, but they were not permitted to exhume the extraterrestrial body. And when they returned, several years later, the headstone and whatever metallic material had lain beneath it had disappeared. It was gone. Obviously somebody had removed it. So this Aurora, Texas UFO incident, fascinating, and it speaks of the crash of something and the burial of a small body, which is small enough to be, for example, at the height of a 6-year-old child, buried at the cemetery of this small town. And where we find the story of the local cemetery that once claimed to hold a body of an 1897 UFO crash. It happened 6 or 7 years before the Wright brothers' first flight, when enormous sightings of one or more cigar-shaped mystery airships, they were called then, UFOs were called mystery airships, were reported across the United States. One of these accounts, April 19, 1987, of the Dallas Morning News, written by Aurora resident S.E. Hayden. The alleged UFO is said to have hit a windmill on the property of Judge J.S. Proctor 2 days earlier around 6 a.m., resulting in the crash. The pilot, who was reported to be not of this world and a Martian, according to a purported Army officer from nearby Fort Worth, did not survive the crash and was buried with Christian rites at the nearby Aurora Cemetery. That cemetery contains a Texas Historical Commission marker mentioning the incident. Purportedly, the wreckage from the crash site was dumped into a nearby well located under the damaged windmill, while some ended up with the alien in the graveyard. And adding to the mystery of this story of Mr. Brawley Oates, who purchased Judge Proctor's property around 1945, Oates cleaned out the debris from the well in order to use it as a water source, but later developed an extremely severe case of arthritis, which he claimed to be the result of contaminated water from the wreckage that was dumped into that water well. And as a result, Oates sealed up the well with concrete slab and placed an outbuilding on top of the slab. According to writing on the slab, this was done in 1957. This is according to Crystal Links. And now going back to Wikipedia, again, on April 19, 1897, according to the Aurora, Texas thing. The account by Alexander Hamilton of Leroy, Kansas, published in the Yates Center Farmers Advocate, April 23rd. Hamilton, his son, and a tenant witnessed an airship hovering above his cattle. So it was the same day as the Aurora, but this time it was in Kansas. By the way, Aurora is around the northern border of Texas, so Kansas is not that far from Texas. When you're flying a mysterious airship, a UFO. So this time it was over his cattle pen. And upon closer examination, the witnesses realized that the red cable, quote unquote, hanging from the airship, this mysterious UFO, had lassoed a heifer, but had also become entangled in the pen's fence. And after trying unsuccessfully to free the heifer, Hamilton cut loose a portion of the fence and then, quote, stood in amazement to see the ship, cow, and all slowly rise and sail off into the wild blue yonder of space. Some have suggested this was the earliest report of cattle mutilation. In 1982, however, UFO researcher Jerome Clark debunked the story and confirmed via interviews and Hamilton's own affidavit that the story was a successful attempt to win the Liars Club competition to create the most outlandish tall tale. But the account of the Aurora, Texas is still a mystery, having to do with this mysterious UFO airship. And there were a lot. I'll leave a link below for you. You can see various mysterious airships in Sacramento, California, in Arkansas, in Texas, basically towards the west of central U.S. around the same time. This is on Wikipedia. Now, obviously, this had nothing to do with the secret space force or the Solar Warden program. This was way before the Wright brothers flew their first aircraft. So, what do you think about this? What could have been going on? Let's remember that even in the various countries of Europe, Germany, and Austria, around the 16th, 17th century, not only did they have UFOs flying over them, they even had UFOs battling above their heads. They had an air fight above their heads, and they were UFOs. And some of them even crashed over at the outskirts of the city. So there were reports of UFOs even in the 16th, 17th century. This one here was in 1566 over Basel, Switzerland. And this one was in 1561 over Nuremberg, Germany. And they tried to somehow, as you can see the text underneath and the battle above, trying to illustrate what was going on. And as you can see on the right, there's a stack of smoke. That's where one of the aircraft had crashed, landed, because of the air battle, the UFO air battle above them. And the same thing happened here in Switzerland 5 years later. As we know, they're not that far from each other, but what were they doing fighting over Earth? And people were witnessing, and again, you'll see the illustration and the text underneath describing what was taking place above their heads. So what was going on? There are other reports of I'll leave the link below on the Wikipedia article. You could see some of them were coming out, men, women, and claiming they were people were asking them, where are you coming from? They said, pointing up and saying something that sounded like Mars. So what were they, speaking English or trying to speak English? Who knows? Now these specific people, the man and woman that landed and were trying to tell them where they were coming from and saying something that sounded like Mars, were human looking. Whereas the one that crashed in Aurora, Texas was definitely not, it appeared as not being of this world and was a very small size, something like a little child of 5 or 6 years old in appearance. So what do you think about all this? If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events. events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.